Welcome back. In the previous session, we dealt with the Romantic movement. We looked into the causes of the Romantic movement. We also saw who were the Romantics. And now, in this session, we would move on to the pre-Romantics. We begin with William Blake, who was a visionary poet, an artist, and engraver with a particular interest in childhood and a strong hatred for mechanical reason and industrialization. Blake rebelled against the social, political, and literary conventions of the 18th century. It is erroneous to have him included among the transitional poets or the precursors of the Romantic revival, as in many ways he has greater affinity for Romanticism than the Romantic poets. He deserves considerable attention for the inclusion of some of the finest qualities of the Romantic period, that includes expression and lyricism. He is best known for his 3 thin volumes, Poetical Sketches published in 1783, Songs of Innocence in 1789, and Songs of Experience in 1794, that contain some of the most immensely popular pieces of English lyricism. A critic comments, the imagery and symbolism as well as the underlying spirit of the revolt of Islam, Alistair and Prometheus Unbound find their nearest parallel in Blake's prophetic books. Both had visions of a world regenerated by a gospel of universal brotherhood, transcending law. The other significant poems are Samson, To the Muses, Milton, But in the Wine Presses the Human Grapes Sing, Not nor Dance, The New Jerusalem, The Grey Monk, Hear the Voice of the Bard, and The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Robert Burns worked as a ploughman and farm laborer. He received good education and was interested in early ballads and folk songs of the Scots. He became the truly national poet of Scotland. His celebrated work is Poems Chiefly in the Scottish Dialect, published in 1786. His poems are imbued with the spirit of Romantic lyricism, with the qualities of spontaneity, humor, pathos, and sympathy with nature and her creations, including the peasants, farmers, and all those who belong to the lower rungs of the society. His poem, A Fond Kiss and Then We Sever, is sentimental, like My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose. However, the poem, The Jolly Beggars, is considerably coarse in rhyme and rhythm, but it possesses sincerity and passion of genuine human feelings. Burns was, to a large extent, influenced by the spirit of the French Revolution. Sir Walter Scott is another Scot who took interest in the old tales of the border and early European poetry. This helped him to expand the themes in his poems and novels. His first published work, The Chase and William and Helen, in 1796, was a translation of 2 ballads by the German Romantic balladier G. A. Berger. A poor translation of Goethe's God's Swan Berlingen followed in 1799. Scott's interest in border ballads came into fruition in his collection of them, entitled Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border, in 3 volumes published between 1802 and 3. His full-length narrative poem, The Lay of the Last Minstrel, in 1805, ran into many editions. The poem is unique for its clear and vigorous storytelling, the picturesque Scottish regionalist elements, vivid evocations of landscape, the depiction of honest pathos and human sentiments, which are also found in the poetic romances, including Marmion in 1808. The Lady of the Lake, published in 1810, was the most successful of these pieces and included Rokeby, published in 1813, and The Lord of the Isles in 1815. In 1813, Scott rediscovered the unfinished manuscript of a novel he had started in 1805. and in the early summer of 1814 he wrote with perfect elan and dexterity the novel Waverley. This original and powerful work was immediately recognized and enjoyed by the people. He took efforts to reinterpret and present a story related to the Jacobite rebellion of 1745 that explicated manners and loyalties of a Scottish Highland society that had gone into oblivion. This book was published anonymously, quite like the other novels he wrote until 1827. We shall now move on to the first generation Romantics. The first generation of Romantics, also known as the Lake Poets, because of their attachment to the Lake District, the northwest of England, are William Wordsworth, who came from the Lake District and was the leading poet of the group. His work was especially associated with the thoughts about the unison of the self with nature and love of nature. His verses include An Evening Walk in 1793, Descriptive Sketches, also published in 1793, Lyrical Ballads 1798, The Excursion 1814, Poems, first collective editions in 1807 and subsequently in 1815, The White Doe of Rylstone 1815, Peter Bell in 1819, The Wagoner, also published in 1819, The River Duddon, a series of sonnets in 1820, Memorials of a Tour on the Continent and Ecclesiastical Sonnets in 1822, The Prelude in 1850 and The Recluse that was published posthumously in 1888. His prose works are Apology for the French Revolution in a letter to the Bishop of Llandaff that was posthumously published in 1793, concerning the relations of Great Britain, Spain and Portugal to each other and to the common enemy, and this crisis, and specifically as affected by the Convention of Sintra in 1809. Two addresses to the freeholders of Westmoreland in 1818, a description of the scenery of the lakes in 1822, as a guide through the district of the lakes, and Kendal and Windermere Railway, two letters published in 1844. Let's now move on to Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was Wordsworth's friend and associate. He was regarded as a powerful intellectual, and his work was often influenced by contemporary ideas about science and philosophy. In 1795, Coleridge befriended William Wordsworth, who greatly influenced Coleridge's verse. Coleridge, whose early work was celebratory and conventional, gradually underwent a change in its representation and appeal as he began writing in a more natural style. In his so-called conversation poems, such as the Aeolian Harp and This Lime Tree Bower My Prison, Coleridge used his intimate friends and their experiences as subject matter of his verse. The following year, Coleridge published his first volume of poetry, Poems on Various Subjects, and began the first of 10 issues of a liberal political publication entitled The Watchman. From 1797 to 1798, he lived near Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy in Somersetshire. In 1798, the two companions collaborated on a joint volume of poetry entitled Lyrical Ballads. The collection is considered as the first great work of the Romantic school of poetry and contains Coleridge's famous poem, The Rime, the Ancient Mariner. In 1817, he published Biographia Literaria, which contained his finest literary criticism. He continued to publish poetry and prose, notably Sibylline Leaves in 1817, Aids to Reflection 1825, and Church and State in 1830. Robert Southey, a prolific writer of poetry and prose, who settled in the Lake District and became poet laureate in 1813. His work was later ridiculed by Byron. As a poet, he produced epics, romances, and metrical tales, ballads, plays, monodramas, odes, eclogues, sonnets, and miscellaneous lyrics. His prose works include histories, biographies, essays, reviews, translations, travelogues, semi-fictional journalism, polemical dialogues, fiction, autobiography and anecdote. Coleridge rightly called him the complete man of letters. Charles Lamb was a poet, but is best known for his essays and literary criticism. A Londoner, he maintained a close relationship with Coleridge. Lamb made his first mark in print as a poet with contributions to collections by Coleridge in 1796 and with Charles Lloyd in 1798. A Tale of Rosamund Grey, a prose romance, appeared in 1798, and in 1802 he published John Woodville, a poetic tragedy. The Old Familiar Faces, 1789, remains his best-known poem, although On an Infant Dying as Soon as It Was Born in 1828 is his finest poetic achievement. In 1807, Lamb and his sister published Tales from Shakespeare, a retelling of the plays for children, and in 1809 they published Mrs. Leicester's School, a collection of stories supposedly told by pupils of a school in Hertfordshire. In 1808, Charles published a children's version of the Odyssey, The Adventures of Ulysses. In 1808, Lamb also published Specimens of English Dramatic Poets who lived about the time of Shakespeare, a selection of scenes from Elizabethan dramas. Lamb's greatest achievements were his remarkable letters and the essays that he wrote under the pseudonym Elia for London Magazine, which was discovered in 1820. Lamb's first Elia essays were published separately in 1823. A second series appeared with the title The Last Essays of Elia in 1833. Lamb's essays ingrained the true spirit of the Romantic movement, which could be related to the romantic zeal and fervour of the age of Coleridge and William Wordsworth. Thomas De Quincey is best known as an essayist and critic who wrote a series of memoirs about the Lake Poets and is considered to be the youngest member of the group. De Quincey's other autobiographical writings include the so-called Lake Reminiscences that was first printed in Tait's magazine between 1834 and 1840. This work deeply offended Wordsworth and the other Lake poets. However, it remains of great interest, although it is highly subjective and contains some elements of malice and matters that lack genuineness. As a literary critic, De Quincey is best known for his essay on the knocking at the gate in Macbeth, which was first printed in the London Magazine in October 1823. It remains a brilliant piece of psychological insight into human passions and emotions and regarded to be a classic of Shakespearean criticism. With a brief background into the Lake poets, we shall now move on into the second generation Romantic poets. And the most prominent among them is George Gordon Lord Byron, an English poet and painter. After receiving a derisive review of his first volume of poetry, Hours of Idleness, in 1808, Byron retaliated with the satirical poem English Bards and Scotch Reviewers. The poem attacked the literary community with wit and satire that was instrumental in giving him the first literary recognition. Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, in his poem of a young man's reflection on travel to foreign lands, the tumult and guilt he experienced as a result of these love affairs were reflected in a series of dark and repentant poems, The Gower, The Bride of Abydos and The Corsair. Byron wrote the third canto to Childe Harold, explaining his travels from Belgium up to Rhine to Switzerland. On a trip to Bernese Oberland, Byron was inspired to write the Faustian poetic drama Manfred. In October 1816, Byron sailed for Italy. Along the way, he continued his wayward encounters with several women and portrayed these experiences in his poem Don Juan. Between 1821 and 1822, Byron edited the newspaper The Liberal. Percy Bysshe Shelley is an Englishman and one of the leading poets of his age. Queen Mab, a philosophical poem, is considered to be his first long, serious work. The poem is a result of Shelley's friendship with the British philosopher William Godwin, whose free-thinking socialist philosophy inspired the genesis of the poem. Shelley produced the verse allegory Alistair or the Spirit of Solitude and other poems. In 1817, Shelley wrote Laon and Cinta, a long narrative poem. It contained references to incest as well as attacks on religion, but was barred from further circulation after only a few copies were published. It was later edited and reissued as The Revolt of Islam in 1818. The same year, he and his new wife left England for the last time. During the remaining 4 years of his life, Shelley produced all his major works that included Prometheus Unbound in 1820, Hymn to Intellectual Beauty, Mont Blanc, Rosalind and Helen, A Modern Eclogue, Lines Written Among the Eugenian Hills, and Julian and Madalo. Some of Shelley's finest extended lyrics, including Ode to the West Wind, The Cloud, To a Skylark, and Ode to Liberty, are worth remembering. John Keats was a London poet, renowned for his odes, sonnets, and for his letters, which contain his reflections on poetry and the contribution of imagination to literary production. His sonnets are On First Looking into Chapman's Homer and O Solitude. His finest volume, Poems by John Keats, was published in 1817. Endymion, a 4,000-line erotic or allegorical romance based on the eponymous Greek myth, appeared the following year. Two of the most influential critical magazines of the time, the Quarterly Review and Blackwood's Magazine, attacked the collection. Between 1818 and 1819, Keats concentrated mainly on Hyperion, a Miltonic blank verse epic of the Greek creation myth. He reworked the entire piece and brought it out as The Fall of Hyperion, which unfortunately remained unpublished until 1856. In July 1820, he published Lamia, Isabella, The Eve of St. Agnes, and other poems. The three title poems depict the mythical and legendary themes of ancient medieval and Renaissance times with picturesque imagery and perfect phrasing that showcase the ingenuity of the poet. The great odes include Ode to Psyche, Ode to a Nightingale, Ode on a Grecian Urn, Ode on Melancholy, To Autumn, and Ode on Indolence. The poets named so far are those who, for many years, dominated the Romantic canon, the group of writers whose works were mostly commonly republished, read, anthologized, written about, and taught in schools, colleges, and universities all over the world. More recently, however, a revised Romantic canon has begun to emerge, which lays more emphasis on women, working class, and politically radical writers of the period. Work by these writers can be found in two anthologies, Romanticism, an anthology by Wu Duncan, and The New Oxford Book of Romantic Period Verse by Megan Jerome, both with useful introductions discussing the justification for extending the canon in this way. Let us now summarize what we have done so far. The relationship of the poets with nature and their appeal to human sentiments found their best expression in the literature of the period. However, this period was influenced by the precursors of the Romantic movement, who had certain commonalities with the Romantic poets. James Thomson, Oliver Goldsmith, Thomas Percy, Thomas Chatterton, James Macpherson, Thomas Gray, William Collins, William Cooper, and George Crabbe. The pre-Romantics, namely William Blake, Robert Burns and Sir Walter Scott, provided the impetus for the movement, while William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Robert Southey, Charles Lamb and Thomas De Quincey, the first generation poets popularly known as the Lake Poets, widened the horizons of this literary movement. The second generation Romantic poets, George Gordon, Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley and John Keats, delved into aspects of nature that were previously never discussed. On the whole, the Romantic movement was a purposeful turn that provided a novel outlook on man and his connection with nature. So far, we have looked into all the aspects of the Romantic movement as well as the Romantic poets. We shall now discuss some of the assignments which could be useful for you in connection with this module and the sessions that we have discussed so far. Let us now move on to understanding more about the Romantic period in the questions that follow, and we shall meet again in our next session. Till then, have a good day.